Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Ellen Ferreira, and I am president of Democrats of the Red Rocks. Democrats of the Red Rocks, otherwise called DORR, D-O-R-R, is proud to bring you this program tonight. We're very excited to see everybody here. I see Sue Gould says she can't get in. I'm not sure why. Anyway, I've been envisioning this session for many, many months, and I need it more and more as time goes by. Many thanks to Pat Hennessy, who is here, our good friend, who arranged and suggested that Dr. Fiore be the one to join us for this session. The emotional turmoil that we have been experiencing for the past more than 8 years is real. And for people who care deeply, it has been pretty brutal. Many of us are estranged from family and longtime friends because our beliefs are just so divergent. We have faced things that just do not make sense, and yet people, a lot of people, believe them. Sometimes I feel like I am living in an alternate universe. But thank goodness I have my friends to validate that it's not just me, that things are kind of wacky out there. People lie without consequences, and that messes with our psyches. It puts us off balance. There are bizarre explanations for things that we see with our own eyes. The mob that we saw invading and desecrating the US Capitol are now being praised as heroes. Joe Biden won the election in 2020. He won it. There's no evidence to the contrary. Yet election deniers believe with their hearts and souls that it was rigged and that he did not win. Things strain our credulity. Unscrupulous members of the Supreme Court are handing down rulings that have us scratching our heads and thinking, this can't possibly be. A rape conviction and 34 felonies guilty results in record-breaking fundraising numbers. Hard to believe. Just hours after the shooting last Saturday, a member of Congress, yes, a member of Congress, said that Joe Biden ordered it. Are you freaking kidding me? I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. And now, with the election only a few months away, loyal Democrats are deeply divided about whether Joe Biden should be our party's nominee, even though he insists he is our guy. People are still looking for a young miracle candidate who's behind door number 2. And the media is not helping. Project 2025, if you haven't heard about it, you need to learn about it. J.D. Vance, our daughters and granddaughters having fewer rights than we did, every day is a new onslaught. It is infuriating and it is stomach churning. Given the number of people that I see on this call right now, you can see you are not the only one struggling to cope. These things are disheartening and huge distractions just when we need to be laser focused. If we lose our steam and become demoralized or overwhelmed or detached or don't vote because Biden is too old, that is not good. Tonight's session, the topic is not current events. The topic is self-preservation. How do we get our bearings in a world gone topsy-turvy, full of lies and conspiracy theories? How do we cross the finish line to victory in November with our brains and our bodies still intact? The session tonight is being recorded, and it will appear on the DORR, Democrats of the Red Rocks, YouTube channel in a few days. We want to wrap up in about an hour and a half. We are so pleased to welcome Dr. Christine Fiore, who is an expert in anxiety disorders. She'll tell you a little bit about her background. We're hoping that you will learn how to better handle your stress tonight. Please put your questions in the chat, and hopefully we'll get to as many as possible. Thank you all for being here tonight. And welcome to Dr. Fiore, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so glad to be doing this with all of you. I share in Ellen's views on how crazy things have been, and it feels like all of us need to continue to find ways to do something about the craziness. And that is also one of the methods of managing anxiety. So I'm not specifically an expert in anxiety. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I was a professor of clinical psychology for 30 years before I retired. And I'm professor emeritus right now, and picking and choosing what I do with my time. Maintaining democracy is something very important to me. So when Pat Hennessy spoke to me about some of the interests, I thought, anxiety is something psychologists deal with on a daily basis, and it is so relevant to many, many clients I work with, but also many people I care about on a daily basis. So I was very interested in putting this together and talking with you about election anxiety and what can we do. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And yes, please put questions in the chat, and we'll hopefully have time at the end. Everyone can see that. What I would love for you to do right now, for me to see, is to put some of your feelings about the upcoming election in the chat, and I will summarize some of them for you. So each of you just enter the chat. Anybody wants to talk about your feelings? Anxiety is obviously a feeling, but it's a complex situation. So any feeling would be good. And then I'll check the chat. Got 18. Hopeless, terrified, dismayed, concerned, angry, fearful, scared, terrified, frightened, dismayed, horrified, concerned, angry again, frightened, concerned, frightened, fearful. Okay, very anxious, but that we don't even know. Like we're back in Nazi Germany. I feel like we have a mass gaslighting going on, worried, angry, yet mesmerized, powerlessness, pissed, all of the above, living in an alternate universe. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. They're good. Those are really good, helpful summaries of all that goes on with anxiety. And one of the bases of anxiety is fear. Fear is one of the strongest sources of anxiety. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint, and any questions that come up throughout, and I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. I have no idea why it doesn't work when you need it to. Any questions, put them in the chat, okay? Because they're really helpful for me to be able to reach you where you need to be reached, okay? There's so much that we all feel, and it's so powerful what we're all going through. And the anxiety is incredible. So it looks to me like some of this is cut off, and I will make sure that you get the entire PowerPoint, Ellen, so that you can make that available. Okay.
Okay.
So anxiety is totally understandable around the election. I don't know how many people took the time to look at that video that Ellen posted on the announcement. The difficulty with anxiety is that we all have personal histories. We all have our own patterns of relating in the world. And that creates a range of ways of how we manage anxiety and how powerful anxiety is at disrupting our lives. So I want to talk about anxiety and understanding anxiety. And then I also want to talk about coping and ways of coping. And then I want to talk about and spend the most time on some ideas for how to manage anxiety. Because I don't think any of us would have predicted we would have been where we are before 8 years ago, right? So this has just been a long period of being disheartened and fearful and dismayed. Okay. So we have also these lifelong patterns of relating and coping. So sometimes we manage anxiety in ways that's worked for us in the past, but it may not work with what's going on right now. Okay. You are the source of knowing whether or not your anxiety management is working for you. So that's something I want you to be thinking about as we go through this. And so we're going to think about symptoms of anxiety and how anxiety impacts you. And you can write this in the chat, but I'm also okay with some people just saying, what kinds of symptoms, what do you interpret as anxiety, and how are you seeing anxiety impact you? It's okay for some people to just say it out loud and unmute yourself.
Overeating.
Overeating. Okay. Thank you. Good one.
Over drinking.
Seeking. Over drinking. Yes.
Not
What else?
sleeping, disrupting
Not
thought
sleeping.
patterns.
Disruption of thought patterns. Great. Thank you.
Some are in the chat. Feeling sick, headaches, intense anger, heart racing, distracted. Yes. Unfocused, retreating from usual social interactions. Sick.
Oversleeping.
Oversleeping, undersleeping, right? We overdo it, we underdo it. Grouchy. Yes. Yes. Okay. You're on it. You're on it. And
Feeling like you're losing control.
what I want, yes, which is also terrifying, right? Some of these things are annoying and disturbing, and some things are terrifying, right?
Yes. Yes.
So what I want you all to be thinking about in terms of anxiety is your sense of whether or not you feel like you need alternative solutions for managing it. Okay. And I want you to think about that because I'm going to give you some, but I also think that there's also each of us is unique, and we want to talk about the range. There's like a continuum of anxiety, and there's a point at which it's okay to say, I am not managing this anxiety well, and I need help with it. Sometimes family helps, sometimes friends help, sometimes support groups help. Sometimes it's okay to get psychotherapy, okay? And you could get psychotherapy for election anxiety, believe it or not. it's entirely anxiety. If it's disruptive to your life functioning, you can get help for it. Okay. So some of you might appreciate this if you haven't seen it. What wine goes well with watching too much TV and worrying about the end of democracy. Okay. This is the over drinking, perhaps, category of a way of coping. Okay. So we are not alone in the suffering and the level of anxiety and trying to cope with what's going on in multiple ways. So the idea of coping and ways of coping has been around for a while in psychology. And frankly, if you wanted to go back to Freud, his defense mechanisms are ways of coping as well. But the idea that we use coping in order to manage fear and distress came out, and stress management came out of Lazarus and Folkman in the 80s. And they are cognitive, originally cognitive and behavioral ways of managing perceptions of internal and external threats to well-being. Okay. There's nothing like the upcoming election to be perceived as both internal and external threats to well-being. Definitely, we need to cope. And these threats are seen as stressors. And when we have a stress response, our stress response is both psychological and physiological. Somebody said they feel sick to their stomach. Some people said they have heart racing, right? These are things that are physically felt in our body, not just psychologically experienced emotionally or in our thoughts. And so fear is often connected to this distress. We've talked about everybody has anxiety differently. Everybody copes differently. And there are many ways to cope. The thing about coping is that sometimes it's effective and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's adaptive, sometimes it's maladaptive. Some coping mechanisms work for one problem, they don't work for another. Sometimes we get used to coping by avoiding, and it works short term, but it doesn't work long term. And I'm going to give you an example of coping by avoiding is you avoid social media, right? If you are getting worked up, I told myself in the last election, I could not listen to the radio before I went to work. I would get worked up. I'd be angry. I'd be upset, and I haven't even started my workday. So I had the radio off. Okay. That's avoiding what I knew was going to be distressing. But if I avoided everything about the election, I also was getting distressed about not knowing what's going on. So I decided there was a time of day when I would open up and hear specific information, and certain information. I just decided I was never going to go on Fox News, for example. My husband likes to go see what they're saying on Fox News. I don't want to hear what they're saying on Fox News. It upsets me too much. It's too outrageous. He'd rather know what they're saying. I would rather not. Okay. I don't want that response. So each of us is different, and we may need different coping strategies for different situations, different material, different experiences that we're having with anxiety. Okay. Your heart is racing versus your stomach's upset versus unable to sleep. We may need different strategies. Okay. So that's something I want you to keep in mind. Some of the language of coping strategies has been discussed in terms of, are your strategies emotion focused or are they problem focused? And which is better? It really depends. But each of these areas, there are tools to be emotion focused in your coping If your emotions are really distressing and you're escalating in fear, you're going to consider certain strategies. If it's problem focused, like you've got things are, all of you are working on voting, and the situations around voting are very distressing, right? And how do you manage that specific problem area and the material that comes up, or you're doing door to door and you're managing what people say to you? That's going to be potentially both a reaction of how you emotionally respond, or you might want to work on managing your reaction to what people say and feeling like you have more tools to respond to what people say to help you with your anxiety. Okay, so it's complex. This is complex. It's not simple. There's a reason why we get overwhelmed and have a hard time knowing exactly what's going to be best for us, or not really know what to do with the full extent of emotions we have. And then there's thought-focused coping, action-focused coping. Same thing, depends, different tools. The idea is that your coping approach should work for you in a situation. And just to be aware, not all coping strategies work for all situations. So you want a toolbox. And the truth is that most of us have toolboxes based on historical precedents, what we've done in the past, what we learned from others, or what we learned about ourselves. And sometimes that's not big enough. And this situation that we're all in is huge and incredibly intense and demanding. And so you want to be able to expand your toolbox. I actually think, Ellen, that this idea of even doing this talk is brilliant, right? It brings you all together. We know that oftentimes working in community helps relieve us. Knowing that we're not alone helps relieve us. So that's working on some sense of the intensity of what we're all going through. But you want that toolbox to be good so that you choose different strategies when you're aware it's not working. This idea of being over-reliant on our historical coping mechanisms, it's not bad. If your coping's working and it's worked for you and you're able to sleep and you're not up over and over again, going over in your mind, what if, then you're doing well. So you may keep up what's working for you. But if you're having a hard time making it through the extent of what we're all involved in, it's worth learning some other things you may not be aware of, or you may never have given enough time to. And that's what I'm hoping to talk about today, is some things that are maybe new or you might not have thought of using, both in managing moments, right? Because sometimes it's a moment when you're getting worked up. And it's also the case that we can work ourselves up over a day, not just a moment. So you want to have tools that are helping you manage a moment. You want to have a tool that's helping you manage the end of a day or how you feel over time. Okay. So to better manage anxiety, we need to use ways of coping that work for us, the situation, and that will address your distress. So you want to be able to address the actual emotions, not just anxiety. You all gave a good long list of the range of emotions. Anxiety is composed of a lot of feelings. It's also composed of behaviors: overeating, overdrinking, undereating, not taking care of yourself. There are things we overdo, there are things we underdo. Body sensations, right? Getting overwhelmed. People can't think. Some people were describing not being able to focus, your heart rate going. right? All these different ways. It's a physiological experience. Thoughts. We start having thoughts that are unhelpful, that get us more and more worried and more anxious. Okay. And then sometimes we have actions. Actions, you can say, are behavior, but sometimes I'm going to talk about actions as proactive. We can do proactive things and take actions that address dysfunctional behavior or troubling emotions or overwhelming body sensations and thoughts. Okay. The main thing here, and this is what I was saying earlier, is that if it's too much for you, you are a person who needs to think about coping differently. Okay. So you can't see the right-hand side. But again, I'd like this in the chat, but anybody who wants to talk out loud, it helps me also to hear anyone who's willing to talk out loud. Or Ellen, you could read the chat because I can't read the chat as at the same time. So what have you learned that can help or not help you cope with anxiety and the stress of the election? So what have you learned that works for you? What have you learned that doesn't work for you? Anybody can offer it up.
Okay, Kim Spangler bought the Calm, C-A-L-M, Calm app, so she can listen to sleep stories about train rides through Norway as she tries to fall asleep. That's good. Exercise, that's one of mine too. Do more, worry less.
Right.
Probably
Sleep
most of the people on this call have heard me say and repeat, action is the antidote to anxiety. If I know that I'm giving my all, I'm working to change things and make things better, that really helps me.
Yes.
Be
Yes.
in nature. That's Val. Listening to music or just going outside and changing the channel in my brain. Staying off social media, taking a break from the news, taking a walk. What doesn't work, thanks, Dottie, trying not to think about it.
Right. Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
So I have a question. If
Mhm.
you're waking up in the middle of the night with this anxiety, I mean, what can you do to, your thoughts are racing. What can you do? It's not like you can go out and take a walk or listen to music. You're just laying there pondering the end of democracy as we know it. How do you deal with a runaway
Right.
train?
Right. Right. So I have a few ideas, and because there's only so much time, I have one section where I'm going to talk about deep muscle relaxation, which is really good for in the middle of the night when your thoughts are racing. So I'm going to talk about deep muscle relaxation. Another thing that can work for people is you really have to get out of your thoughts. It's not that you're not going to think about it, but when you need to sleep, you need to stop your thoughts from racing, right? So sometimes people literally turn those apps on. So they have a guided imagery or a meditation that they're listening to, and it pulls them out of the thoughts that have been pulling them intensely, and your brain wants to solve it. Your brain is really intense on trying to solve the unsolvable, especially at 3 a.m. It likes 3 a.m. insolvable ways to keep you up. So you want to undo it. But we're going to talk about some of those things. What else doesn't have people found don't work?
Watching the 11 o'clock news.
Yep. Yep. Because if you don't want to sleep, that's a good way to do it, right?
Bitch fest.
Bitch fest. Sometimes that escalates you instead of de-escalates, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And some people really, venting really feels like it works for them. Other people, whoo, you go home 10 times worse than before you ever said a word, right? So this is how it's a individual thing as well. What else?
I meditate. I find that really
Okay.
helpful.
Okay. We're going to talk about some of the early steps into meditation using breathing in a minute. But yes, meditation can really help. And that's similar to what I was saying at 3 a.m. when you have that Calm app. It's a guided imagery or a guided meditation, and that can get your mind somewhere else. Okay. When we go through some of this, it may be more clear for people when you get stuck in habits that aren't working for you. And some of you clearly have figured out you have to find something else because you can't live with sleeplessness, or you don't want to continue to overeat, etc. So you've already described some really great ways of coping by exercise and nature and meditation, etc. So I'm going to move on from this one. So here are some of the recommended ways to cope with anxiety and stress. And I've only picked some selective ones because we don't have all day. And I do want to spend time on these in the time that we have together. Okay. So it doesn't mean there aren't more. It doesn't mean that what you're finding doesn't work, because number one solution is the way you cope that works for you. Okay. The idea here is to give you a bigger toolbox. If you haven't thought of using some of these things, then I want to make sure that you have knowledge and potential to utilize them in your life. So I've broken it up as though emotion, thoughts, and actions or / behavior are really not related to each other. The truth is they're very interactive, okay? But I'm trying to help you think about, I am hyperventilating. If I'm hyperventilating, I want you to think about the emotional experience being overwhelming, and to focus on breathing or deep muscle relaxation. Same thing for an upset stomach. Emotions often are immediate triggers to physiological response. So I've broken them up this way, but you'll see that they're often overlapping. So we're going to do some breathing work, and I'm going to show you what deep muscle relaxation is. I'm going to give you some of the cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. One is checking the evidence, and the other is based in mindfulness, staying in the here and now. And the last is based on a mix of positive psychology and cognitive psychology and mindfulness. For thoughts and then actions, I'm going to talk about actions in terms of commitments and compassion. Okay. So this is the selective. There are more tools, thankfully, but this will hopefully get you started if you're not using these already. So I have outlined here breathing as the first exercise available to you. I think a lot of the time people take for granted that we're all breathing, so we're all breathing fine and well. And how could that be a solution? And I want you to know that we know when you're anxious, you don't breathe well. You actually breathe shallowly. And by breathing shallow, you are increasing your anxiety. Okay. You can't breathe well and be anxious. They're actually impossible to do at the same time. I'll give you an example. And I see it every day, but I saw it all the time when I would administer exams. When I would administer exams, I'm in the room, have all the exams in my hand, and I would go row by row and hand out the exams. And as the students got the exams, I all of a sudden would hear deep sighs, like they were holding their breath until they got the exam and could look at it and could let go of all the tension they were feeling about taking the exam. And then throughout the exam, you hear breathing and release of breathing. Okay. Breathing is no small thing. It's central to meditation, but it's also a central tool to managing anxiety, especially managing moments. And the first one that I'm going to give you is really good for managing moments, and it's belly breathing. And belly breathing is deep breathing. It's breathing so that your belly pulls in and you let out, and you can make it sound like something. But if you're in a situation where you're with someone else and you don't want them to know that you're trying to contain your anxiety, you can take a deep breath and let it out without making a lot of noise at all. And the one thing about breathing is that even though we might think we're really good at it, we're pretty distracted breathers. So we have a hard time even making it to 5 on deep belly breathing. So the great thing is you have 10 fingers. So when you're working on effectively calming yourself and getting your breathing done, you can even hide your hand, but you can count and put your thumb out and count with your fingers till you make it to 5. If you make it to 5, okay. So I'm going to have us belly breathe to 5 right now as a group. And I'm going to start you out, and we're all going to take a deep breath. And we're going to release it. And we're going to count that as 1. And then I want you to stay with me and take another deep breath and release it and count it as 2. And you're going to take another deep breath and release it and count it as 3. It takes time when you focus on it and you use it. Another deep breath and count it, and it's 4. Another deep breath and you count it as 5. How do you feel?
Better. Sleepy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredibly calming to breathe and to breathe well. Okay. And that was just 5. If you get to 5 and you're not calmed, you have 5 more fingers. Okay. It's just a simple way to manage moments when you're freaking out. Okay. And you can feel it, and it feels out of control. And even if your thoughts, I know I said this was emotions, sometimes in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, without doing what we're going to do next, which is deep muscle relaxation. It's longer. It takes a little more time. My experience is you don't make it through it all before you fall asleep, but I think it's a good tool also. But just breathing can bring you down, okay? And remember, when you're anxious, you're probably, well, we know you don't breathe well. So your first cue is, how am I breathing? Okay. And you should know you all intuitively do the sigh and the breath. I watched 5 people do it today and told them when I saw them do it. We weren't even working on it, but you could see there was a release and a breath. So I don't see the comments section, but I want to move on to deep muscle because I want us to have time for everything. Is that okay for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. So deep muscle relaxation was one of the relaxation response. Anyone remember that book that came out probably in the 70s, maybe the 80s, the relaxation response? It's 8-1. And it's a great tool to have, especially when you're stuck in the middle of the night and you cannot fall asleep. And for me, I learned the relaxation response before I ever took yoga. And when I took yoga, I said, oh my God, almost every yoga pose is the relaxation response. No wonder it's so good. Okay, so I want you to think about, in some recommendations, yoga is a good exercise for anxiety and restorative experiences. But deep muscle relaxation is, you don't even have to get out of your bed. Okay, you're laying in your bed. Here's the first thing you do. You take a deep breath in and you scrunch your top of your head and your eyes and you hold it with that breath. You're holding it and you're scrunching, and then you go, you let it out and you release the scrunch of your head. Okay, muscle tension, breath in, release. You let go of the scrunch of your head and you let the breath go. Okay, that's the beginning. You start at the top of your body and you end at your feet. And my experience is I don't make it to my feet. And I can tell you that I was teaching deep muscle relaxation without ever really needing to use it. And then I was supposed to get on an airplane from Rhode Island to New York City and then to California. And our flight got delayed and I was waiting and it was freezing and it was very unclear when we were ever going to get on the plane. And while I was waiting to get on the plane, the stewardesses were discussing how drunk the pilot was when he showed up to work that morning. Okay. And I started going, is this going to be our pilot? And is this why we're delayed? I thought we're delayed because it's like minus 20 or something. And I started getting all worked up and we were delayed for hours and I still never knew what happened, but everything was a mess. We get onto this plane. It's a puddle jumper. It's freezing cold. I think it's going to be a regular plane, but it's Rhode Island to JFK. And it's this shitty little plane that had no heat. It was free. And I started getting more anxious. And I said, I am going to jump out of my skin. I have to figure out a way to not experience this. I have to go to sleep. And I used deep muscle relaxation in that situation. And I fell asleep and woke up at JFK. So I'm telling you, it's powerful. Okay. And I want you to keep it in mind when you feel like you are really, really overwhelmed, when you're up and you cannot get to sleep. So I'm going to do the next part. Okay. You did your scrunch. You can scrunch your jaw next. Take that deep breath in, scrunch your jaw, neck, hold it tight. Release it. It feels great. You pull in tight, you release. Next, you do your shoulders. Super tight. Hold that breath. Release it. Next, you do your arms. You hold your arms super tight. You hold that breath in. Release it. The breath and your muscles released at the same time. Then you do your stomach. Then you do your butt. Then you do your thighs. You do your calves. You do your feet. I rarely make it to my feet. Sometimes I'm gone by my calves. Okay. This is really tense, much more intense, you can tell, than the breathing, but the breathing worked. This is combining breathing with muscle tension and then relax. Okay. And that's an incredible tool to have in your kit for any time. Okay. Any questions about this? Put it in the chat so we can move on to some of the other stuff. Okay. So those are two tools right away that if they weren't in your book, I hope they are now or in your box. Okay. Thoughts. Thoughts. That's what keeps us up at night. That's what escalates. That's when we're having bitch sessions. People are expressing their thoughts, maybe their feelings too. We're getting worked up. In ways of coping, we come up with thoughts that we think oftentimes are going to help us, and sometimes they make things worse. So in psychology, we call these either thinking errors or cognitive distortions. Either way, they may work sometimes, but they're not working and they're making things worse for you. Okay, so I selected of the 15 to 22 in psychology world, ones that I think are relevant and worth talking about for election anxiety. Does that mean there aren't more that apply to you personally or to other situations? Definitely there are. I have a link in the reference page at the back of this PowerPoint for you to look at other ones, okay? We also all have our favorite ones that we rely on, whether they work or not, because we're comfortable with them. So why did I choose catastrophic thinking for the election group? Because we are all worried about a major catastrophe come election, right? So catastrophic thinking may have a reality base, right? But if today we are thinking catastrophically, unless we channel that really effectively, like working on voting, and it works for us, we hang in catastrophic thinking. There's no way for us to be anything but upset, right? So we have to catch ourselves in catastrophic thinking, and we have to do something else. It's similar to social media, right? Or news. You have to catch yourself starting to worry about the end of democracy and realize my heart rate's going up. It's right before bedtime. I'm getting irritable and angry, and I want to shoot somebody. Bad idea. So we need to catch ourselves in catastrophic thinking and put it away. It doesn't mean that your thoughts aren't valid. It's that way of coping and thinking about it is making things worse for you in that moment, and they're not helpful, and you need to get rid of them. So you need to think of something else. You need to do something else. Just like I said, going for a walk or what other people have talked about, meditating, you need to catch that you're there and be able to shift out of it. Minimization, okay? Minimization is important in coping. We don't want to escalate or think of always the worst case scenario. So sometimes we do need to minimize and say, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. But sometimes when we minimize, we don't get anything done. We avoid, we procrastinate, we're being ineffective too. So when you get minimizing and you're putting off and not getting things done or avoiding, minimization isn't serving you either as a way of coping. So you need to be able to allow yourself to have some of whatever's going on, enough to motivate you to be effective and get things done, And this is one of the things, for example, for people who oversleep, right? You can sleep to avoid. You can minimize to avoid, right? And so again, you need to catch yourself and see it and say, oh, I'm really frustrated. What can I do with myself that's going to be helpful about what it is that I'm minimizing that I just need to tackle, and what's going to help me tackle it. Okay. And the check the evidence piece of this is the cognitive behavioral piece. And that is how to keep you honest. Because these are distortions only because they're making you today worry about November 7th in a way that you can't get anything done, or that you're sleepless and not eating. And you need today to be effective, right? So you need, it's not that it can't be catastrophic, it's just that it doesn't have to be today. Does that make sense? This is about ways that you can control and take control of today, now, and moments, just like anything else. Emotional reasoning is another one. We all have strong feelings. I'm not going to talk about whether Biden should be president or not with this group. We'd probably have nothing else to talk about, right? Everyone has some strong feelings about it and what's going on. What happens is when all of our actions and everything else going on in our life ends up being run by emotional reasoning, nothing else can get done. It's an overthinking, okay? One of the things that there's an approach in psychology called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of their statements that I love that is about this area of how to manage your thoughts is they call it get out of your mind and into your life. Get out of your mind and into your life. When we're overthinking, we're not living and doing, okay? And it can be it disempowers you. It disempowers you. So you all have important things you want to do. You all are heavily involved and care a lot is for you to be disempowered, right? Should statements are a similar thing. This is where we disempower ourselves by, I should do this. I feel that this is important and I think this needs to be done. And they're often expectations that are high and demanding of us more than is fair or possible or needed. Okay. And should statements are very controlling of you, and we can also put them on others. And you can just catch yourself saying, I really should go for a walk. You may not have time to go for a walk. When you beat yourself up for not going for a walk, you make it worse than having gone for a walk, right? So we need to keep should statements in check so that they don't dominate and make us feel bad. And the more we feel bad, the less energy we have and the more we disempower ourselves, okay? So this is complex, but I want you to think about, this is the anxiety thoughts we have, some of them that can get in the way of feeling good and of managing our lives in a way that gives us strength as opposed to takes away our strength, okay? Because anxiety can be immobilizing. We don't want it to be immobilizing for you, okay? Any thoughts, comments, or questions, please put them in the chat so we can talk about them. I
Nothing
want
in the
to be able
chat.
to move on.
I would
Okay,
say we can move on.
please feel free to. Okay. Here and now. Now, it's pretty hard in 2024 to not have heard about the here and now. And in psychology, it's not a minor thing. And it's also not a minor thing. It's just like breathing. We think we do it, but we actually are often terrible at it. Okay. And especially if you're anxious, it's often because you're beating yourself up or someone else up in your mind about the past, or you are torturing yourself about the future and the what ifs. Okay. So what we can control best is ourselves and our present moment. So when we become over invested in the past or the future at the cost of the present, we're no longer in the here and now. And I know that all of you are working on the election, which is in the future, and every day counts. But what that will be in the here and now is every yourself worked up about what if in the future, you come back to now and you help yourself focus on what can I do now with myself, with others for today. Okay. Sometimes you need to do that by bringing yourself back with your breath, taking a few good breaths and say, oh, I'm coming back to myself. And you do it with a breath. Sometimes you have to catch that your thoughts were catastrophic and they weren't very helpful. And I'm going to come back today and think about today. What can I do today that's going to help me feel empowered and able and let go of that anxiety? Okay. So the here and now is another tool when you're feeling unfocused, when you're feeling pulled, when you're feeling demoralized and defeated or overwhelmed and scared. Here and now, what can I control? I can control me. I can control myself. I can control my moment, my day. Okay. As much as you can control. We don't control 100% of that, right? But you control yourself in that. Okay. That's another tool, bringing yourself back there. Here's another one. It takes a little bit more time, but I think we're doing okay on time. It's a way of remembering and keeping positivity. And positivity, I want you to know, is not being Pollyanna. Okay. It's not helpful in our current situation to be Pollyanna, which is overly optimistic in face of evidence to the contrary, right? Positivity is, we've got a glass. It's half, we could see it as half empty or half full. If you see it as half empty and hanging half empty, it's not going to take long for you to get anxious and depressed because there's half full going on at the same time. Okay. Same glass. It's both half empty and half full. What are you going to pick? Now, there may be times where you have to take a look at what's half empty to get things done. But if you are anxious and overwhelmed, you're going to check yourself and catch that, oh no, I may be hanging in half empty too much. I'm going to be half full. What am I thankful for? Right? We've learned that gratitude is an amazing thing. Maybe I need a walk. Maybe I need a 5-minute break to just get my thoughts together. You check your thoughts to make sure that you can find the half full, because the half empty is tearing you down. Okay. Many of you, your work is in half empty. My work is in half empty. I have to sit with people all the time in their suffering and pain. But I have to be able to see the half full at the same time I'm sitting with people who may not be able to see it, and they're hanging in half empty. So the C on calm is checking your thoughts to ensure you can find the positive. Are you hanging too much and half empty at the cost of half full? Okay. It's fluid. The A, address only what is humanly possible. Be wise, be fair to yourself and others. Right? That kind of goes back to that distortion of the shoulds and expecting too much and all of that. This is for you. Address order to yourself and others. Okay. We only have so much capacity. We all have our limits. If you are getting so anxious that it's getting in the way, you want to be able to come back to yourself, either emotionally with emotional tools. We haven't gotten to action tools, but you have described a lot. Or these thought tools or thought tools of your own network. Okay. L in calm, level. Help yourself find balance. The half empty, fast, half full. There's a balance to not hanging in one or the other too much. Find balance in all aspects of your living, mind and body, relationships and activities, being kind and loving to yourself and others. There's this equanimity, this balance of finding, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling out of control, everything feels disastrous, horrific, depressing, disappointing. You need to come back, find balance, find something that brings you joy, be with people that make you laugh. Check those thoughts, check where your mind goes, right? Finding balance. You're working too much. You're working on this issue too much. It's consuming you. Let it go. Find balance. Okay. The last piece, meaning. Meaning gives us purpose. You all, to be where you are, you clearly care. You have found a meaning. But in order to be focused, effective, and have this bring you joy, you need to work on how to do these other things so that you're not sidelined, disempowered, and taken away by anxiety. Okay, we don't want to give anxiety power. I talk about this with depression too. We have to battle depression. We have to battle anxiety sometimes. We don't want our brains trained to be in an anxious place or a depressed place. We want our brains to be where we want them to be. We want to be in charge of the bus, not our brain running. Some of you have heard of monkey mind, running wild with all of our things that make us feel out of control. Bring it back to yourself. Be calm. Okay, so this is another tool. You're feeling scattered and overwhelmed. Calm with positivity and balance. And these are the components. Again, any questions, thoughts, comments in the chat? Okay. So, actions. You are all doers. Doers enough to be doing something actively about this situation. And you came up with really great ideas of things to do. This section on actions is what you can do and what you need to do. And it says less of. Okay, that's the other the other column that you can't see. So you do your part and you do enough, not too much. If it's too much, you may be entering the world of anxiety. Okay, do your part and enough. We talk about a lot of the time in the work I do, good enough parent, good enough manager, good enough engineer. You are good enough. Give yourself some peace. Getting grounded. This is a term that's often used. Oftentimes in psychology, when we're talking about getting grounded, it means you are in your body. You can feel your feet on the floor, your butt in your seat. You can smell, I don't smell anything in this room. I see all of you on the Zoom. I can hear actually my computer. You get grounded, you're in your body. You come back to yourself, not just in your breath. You act to feel present with yourself. You find balance. This is an action to find balance. It's not just thoughts and feelings. It's an action. You do things that bring you balance. Okay. Same thing with finding joy. It's an action. You pursue being with the grandkids more who bring you joy, or your friend down the street, or your dog for a walk, or your partner. Okay. You make time for those things. You don't put them off. You breathe, calm your mind and body. You think positively, you find peace. What you can do. And these things that we've talked about and the things you all talked about are counters to anxiety. There are many of them. And if they work, they're golden. If they don't work, expand your toolbox. Okay. Make it bigger. So what do you need to do less of? Too much or too little of anything, right? Too much media, too much work, too much food, too much sleep, too little media. Then you start driving yourself crazy because you keep asking people who want to know. And so you've cut yourself down to too little. So it's the balance thing. Perfectionism has a whole huge area, but it creates a lot of anxiety for us. Okay. We do not live in a perfect world. We aren't perfect. Others aren't perfect. When we set expectations that are too high, we exhaust ourselves and we create anxiety. It's one of the common areas to create anxiety. And the last thing here is coping strategies that don't work or make you miserable. If they make you miserable, try something else. That sounds a lot easier than it is. We'd just do it if it was that easy. But I put it up there because it's a goal, something to attain, right? Something to work on. That's something worthwhile. And I also have on here, get psychotherapy if you feel overwhelmed or stuck. It's out there for you. If you have medical care, anxiety, this would be considered an adjustment anxiety. Anxiety you're adjusting to, okay? It counts, and people can help you specifically with how you are responding and how it's not helpful for you. I'm being as general, but trying to give you tools that you may or may not have known about and how to use them. Okay. I'm going to move on. I'm going to read this out loud. It's my last slide, and then we'll have some time for questions or talking. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It's based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us energy to act, at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world in a different direction. If we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. Howard Zinn. I don't know how many of you know Howard Zinn. I have one of his more famous books here, A People's History of the United States. He was a historian. He wrote plays. This book is a beautiful book about the history from the perspective of marginalized people. So it's a really fascinating look at American history. So I'm going to end there and open it up to questions or comments or curiosities when I stop the share. And again, Ellen, I'm going to give you this PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you so much. That was fascinating, and I've gotten several good tips. I don't want to confess exactly which ones to this whole crowd, but I'm guilty of quite a few things that I'm doing wrong. Perfectionism being one of them, as a number of people who work with me will know. Val writes, I can find moments without anger. Whoops, now that's moving. Anger and anxiety, but how do you deal with feeling that you need to get back to feeling angry or else you'll become apathetic? That's a good question.
It is a good question. I talk about this with people in terms of peak performance too. Like if you're an athlete, you want to care enough to do your best, but you want to care so much that you're numb and you can't feel your body when you're running a race, right? And it's similar in this, right? If you tamper down too much, this is this balance idea. You're tampering down so much that you are saying, oh, I can't cope with this. I just can't care so much. I'm not going to care. And we all know people like this. We know people like this who really are saying they can't do anything because it's too much for them. And so then they're withdrawing or holding back. And I would say emotion regulation, an art. We all work on it our entire lives. It doesn't come easily, but it's that effort of seeing if you're seeing yourself get apathetic and you don't want to be there, then you need to allow yourself some regulated access to what makes you care. That's the finding meaning, right? Or the other aspects of things that I talked about. You allow them in a way that you can regulate them. You may need to regulate it where you include, I was talking about with people filling your cup. Don't have an empty cup. Don't work so hard that you have not exercised, you've not eaten well, you haven't seen your family very much, you're running on empty, and those are the things that bring you joy. Dysregulated. Make sure you're working to fill your cup so that you have enough to be able to care enough. That's that enough. Not too much so that you can't manage it, enough so that you can. Not too little so you withdraw and pull yourself out. If that truly is an ongoing battle, emotion regulation is something, believe it or not, we should have learned in childhood. We should have learned it from the beginning. We didn't all get that. And if you didn't get it and you didn't get it well, it can be a lifelong battle, not just a lifelong learning. for all of us, we have to keep learning how to regulate emotions. I don't know if that is specific enough, but hopefully that helps.
That was good.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you.
thanks.
What else?
What
Anybody
else?
have comments or questions, things they want to discuss? You said when you and I spoke that psychotherapy is most likely free if people need it and come with anxiety.
It's not free. It's covered by your insurance, and everybody's insurance is different, right?
Okay.
Some people it is free.
Okay,
Some
but it is
people
covered
not.
by insurance. Okay,
Mhm.
that's good to
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
I guess this feeling of hopelessness is what a lot of people are feeling now. It's just like it's overwhelming. It's one thing after another, and it's relentless. It was
Completely.
literally one day after another. Now we find out that Biden has COVID. I mean, it's just up, 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 up. And so I think the urge is to pull back. And this is the time that we should be stepping on the gas, not pull back.
Mhm.
But I'm seeing volunteer fatigue, and that people who were normally good volunteers just say, I can't deal with this anymore. And they think
Right.
somebody else will deal with it. And
Right.
that's not necessarily the case.
Right. Or the person may need a break, but they may need a break for a recharge. Like they may have overdone it.
Right.
And sometimes a break means you recharge. You do those things that you weren't doing that put you out of commission. You address them and you help yourself re-energize and come back.
Right.
I want to refer back to one thing that I think is worth saying. Even I would say it's how psychologists view Trump. There's not a day when somebody with a personality disorder doesn't have a capacity to exhaust you. And the problem is that we're all being held hostage to a person who doesn't deserve this level of attention and reinforcement, right? And not everybody understands what personality disorders, but I think the idea is that there's no question that narcissism is a problem here, and sociopathy. Those are two personality disorders. The problem is that the way that the entire country, it didn't have to take this time. It was 4 years of it as presidency, right? Every day there was something as a president. There was no calm. There was no sense that other people were doing their job or managing things, or we had to hear about everything. And for all of us, there are other people in the world we've been exposed to who have personality problems, and they are exhausting. That should be your first cue that might be going on. And so we have to learn boundaries. We have to learn boundaries with people who are this way. And we have a problem because the world, the media, nobody wants to set a boundary here. And so we have to set our own. We have to set our own and not allow this one consume us, eat us alive, right?
True. Okay, let me see. Although most of my friends are on the same political page as I, some of them seem to have a head in the sand mentality, which frustrates me. I know I can't change their withdrawal, as that is how they're coping, but how do I deal with my own negative, frustrated reaction to that? I think there are things we can always do in our own individual capacities. I am not a quitter. I don't want them to be. Yeah, that goes back to your should. imposing
Yeah.
your should on other people.
Well, and also how much power we have to manage and change other people, right? It's hard enough to change ourselves, and let alone to try to take on changing someone else, right? It's pretty tricky. So one of the things that I think about with this is when you care about the relationship, friendships, family, or whatever, there's a way to open it up so that you can talk about it if you can, in a way that brings you closer instead of further apart. Because what you're describing is a divisiveness around this, right? Even though you're friends, you feel some anger and that's pulling you away. So one of the ways to deal with that is to be curious, openly curious. What is it about this that you want to stick your head in the sand, whatever the topic is? And you have to be openly curious. Like, your job is not to convince them to be you. Your job is to be openly curious about what makes them be that way. And it's actually maybe very interesting to you. You might find out something you didn't even know about them. Like, I can't manage my emotions. I'm sleepless. I find that I'm dysregulated. The reason why I withdraw and I don't do anything is because I'm miserable. Okay, so there's different aspects. So if that's helpful, good.
Okay, good.
We only have a minute left. Is
Yeah, a
that
minute left. Anything
good?
else? Any other burning issues that people have before we shut down for the night? I have friends on the East Coast that are watching, and
Yes.
it's pretty late there. So
Yes, it is.
yeah,
Okay.
11 o'clock there. All right. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate.
Yes, I hope it's what you needed.
Yes,
I hope it's what you needed.
it is. And again, just what you said, being here together, knowing that we're all in the same boat and we're all sharing the kind of anxiety that we feel. And I think you gave us some good tips on things to do.
Great.
I will try them tonight. We'll see.
Great.
There's a lot of thanks in the chat. Many, many
Great. Thank you all.
So thank you, and thank you,
all.
Pat Hennessy.
It was
for
a joy
bringing.
for me.
Good, good. All right. Well,
Yes.
thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for
Take
being
care.
here.
Good
Okay.
night.
Bye.